there are car brands, and then there is Ferrari. Not just a company, not just a logo, but a symbol of speed, obsession, and perfection. This is the story of how one man turned passion into one of the most powerful brands in the world. This is the story of Ferrari before the cars. Before the fame, there was a man. Enzo Ferrari, born in 1898 in Italy. Enzo didn't dream of building luxury cars. He dreamed of one thing: winning. Racing wasn't just a hobby, it was an obsession. At a young age, Enzo attended a car race with his father. That moment changed everything: the noise, the speed, the danger. From that day forward, he knew his life would revolve around racing. But success didn't come easy. World War I, loss of family, financial struggles. Enzo's path was anything but smooth. And yet, that adversity built something powerful: relentless ambition. Enzo didn't start as a legend. He started small, working for companies, trying to get into racing. Eventually, he joined Alfa Romeo. And this was the turning point. At Alfa Romeo, Enzo learned everything: engineering, performance, competition. But more importantly, he learned how to win, even while working for Alfa Romeo. Enzo had a bigger vision. He didn't just want to race, he wanted control. He wanted to build something of his own in 1929. That vision became reality. Enzo founded Scuderia Ferrari. Originally, it wasn't a car company, it was a racing team. And that detail changes everything. Enzo wasn't interested in being average. Second place meant nothing. Losing was unacceptable. This mindset would later define Ferrari as a brand. Enzo wasn't interested in being average. Second place meant nothing. Losing was unacceptable. This mindset would later define Ferrari as a brand from the very beginning. Ferrari had a different DNA, not luxury first, not comfort first, performance first. Always the iconic Ferrari logo, the prancing horse, was inspired by a World War I pilot, a symbol of power, speed, and pride. And it would become one of the most recognized logos in history. Here's the truth most people don't know. Enzo didn't build cars to sell. He built cars to fund racing. Cars were a means to an end. Racing was everything. In 1947, the first official Ferrari car was born, the Ferrari 125S. This wasn't just a car. It was the beginning of a legend. In 1947, the first official Ferrari car was born, the Ferrari 125S. This wasn't just a car. It was the beginning of a legend. Before the brand, before the red cars, before the legend of Ferrari, there was only one thing that mattered: racing. Before the brand, before the red cars, before the legend of Ferrari, there was only one thing that mattered: racing. This is the part of the story most people ignore. But it's the most important, because before Ferrari existed, the obsession was already alive, and it was growing. Inside one man, Enzo Ferrari. Enzo didn't start as a businessman, he started behind the wheel. After World War I, he chased every opportunity to race, not for fame, not for money, but for something deeper: purpose. There are moments in history that don't just create companies, they create legends. And for Enzo Ferrari, that moment came after years of obsession, sacrifice, and vision, because by the mid-1940s, everything he had experienced, every race, every failure, every lesson learned at Alfa Romeo, was building towards something inevitable: independence. This wasn't just about leaving a company, it was about breaking free from limitations. Enzo Ferrari didn't want to follow orders anymore. He didn't want to build someone else's legacy. He wanted control, total control. But the timing couldn't have been more difficult. Europe was recovering from the devastation of World War II. Resources were scarce. Industries were unstable. And starting a car company under those conditions was almost impossible. But Ferrari was never built on logic. It was built on obsession. In 1939, after leaving Alfa Romeo, Enzo signed an agreement that prevented him from using his own name in any automotive venture for several years. Imagine that. A man destined to build one of the most iconic brands in history, unable to use his own name. So instead, he founded a company called Auto Avio Costruzioni. It wasn't Ferrari, not yet. But it was the beginning. At first, the company focused on manufacturing parts and equipment. There were no legendary red cars, no roaring engines, no prancing horse dominating the roads, just quiet work, preparation, patience. But inside Enzo's mind, the vision never stopped. He wasn't thinking about survival, he was thinking about domination. And then, in 1947, everything changed. The restriction expired. The name Ferrari was finally free to exist. And with that, the first true Ferrari was born. The Ferrari 125S. This wasn't just a machine, it was a statement. Powered by a V12 engine, something almost unheard of at the time for a new manufacturer, the 125S represented everything Enzo believed in. Performance over comfort, speed over convenience, emotion over practicality. This car wasn't built for the average driver, it was built to win. And when it first hit the road, it didn't win immediately. In fact, its debut race ended in failure. But Enzo didn't see failure the way others did. He saw data, feedback, progress. Because for him, losing was never the end. It was part of the process. And just weeks later, Ferrari achieved its first victory. That moment changed everything. Because now, Ferrari wasn't just an idea. It was real. It was proven. And the world started paying attention. But here's what made Ferrari different from every other car company at the time. Enzo never intended to build road cars as the main goal. His true passion was racing, always. It was about belonging to something rare, something powerful, something elite. And Enzo understood that better than anyone. He didn't want Ferrari to be for everyone. In fact, he wanted the opposite. Exclusivity wasn't a side effect, it was the strategy. The harder it was to own a Ferrari, the more people wanted one, and that desire became unstoppable. As the years went on, Ferrari began building not just cars, but a myth. A brand that stood for perfection, for obsession, for winning at any cost. And Enzo? He remained at the center of it all, focused, demanding, uncompromising. He pushed his engineers beyond limits. He demanded excellence at every level. Because in his world, second place didn't exist. Only victory, only legacy, and that relentless pursuit turned Ferrari into something far greater than a car manufacturer. It became a symbol, a dream, a benchmark for what's possible when passion meets discipline. By the end of this phase, Ferrari was no longer just a new company. It was a rising force, a name that would soon dominate racing, challenge giants, and define an entire industry. But the real battles were just beginning, because in the next chapter, Ferrari doesn't just compete, it fights against rivals, against expectations. There's a moment in every great story where survival is no longer enough, where proving you exist is replaced by proving you're the best. And for Ferrari, that moment came fast, because entering the world of racing wasn't the hard part. Dominating it, that was the real war. And Enzo Ferrari, he was ready for it. After the first victory of the Ferrari 125S, something shifted. The world of motorsport began to notice not just the cars, but the mindset behind them, relentless, precise, unforgiving. And at the center of it all was Enzo Ferrari, a man who didn't celebrate wins for long, because he was already thinking about the next race, the next improvement, the next opponent. And those opponents were not small. In post-war Europe, motorsport became a battlefield, not just of speed, but of national pride. Manufacturers weren't just racing for trophies, they were racing for identity, for dominance, for legacy. And one name stood above many others. Alfa Romeo, the same company where Enzo once worked, now stood on the opposite side. And this wasn't just competition, this was personal, because Enzo wasn't just trying to win races anymore. He was trying to prove something, that he didn't need Alfa Romeo, that he could build something greater, something unstoppable. In post-war Europe, motorsport became a battlefield, not just of speed, but of national pride. Manufacturers weren't just racing for trophies, they were racing for identity, for dominance, for legacy. And one name stood above many others. Alfa Romeo. The same company where Enzo once worked now stood on the opposite side. And this wasn't just competition, this was personal. Because Enzo wasn't just trying to win races anymore. He was trying to prove something, that he didn't need Alfa Romeo, that he could build something greater, something unstoppable. But Alfa Romeo wasn't the only rival. Soon, a new challenger would rise, one that would define Ferrari's story for decades, a name that would become synonymous with precision, innovation, and cold, calculated performance. Porsche. Different philosophy, different approach, but the same goal, victory. The early 1950s marked Ferrari's true emergence, race after race. The red cars began to dominate. Their engines screamed louder, their designs became sharper, their presence impossible to ignore. And then came one of the biggest stages in motorsport, Formula One World Championship. This was the ultimate proving ground, the best drivers, the best teams, the highest stakes. And Ferrari entered, not to participate, but to win. In 1951, Ferrari achieved a historic breakthrough, defeating Alfa Romeo in a Grand Prix race. That victory wasn't just another win, it was symbolic. It marked the moment Ferrari stepped out of Alfa Romeo's shadow and into its own legacy. For Enzo, it was personal validation, years of sacrifice finally paying off, but success came with pressure, because once you win, you're expected to keep winning, and maintaining dominance is harder than achieving it. Rivals adapted, technology evolved, competition intensified, and Ferrari had to stay ahead. Constantly, relentlessly, drivers became heroes, machines became legends, and Ferrari became a force. Names like Alberto Ascari began to rise. Drivers who didn't just race for Ferrari, they embodied it: precision, courage, fearlessness. Ascari would go on to secure back-to-back championships in 1952 and 1953. And with those victories, Ferrari was no longer just competing in Formula One, it was defining it. But behind the victories, there was always tension, because Enzo Ferrari was not an easy man to work with. He demanded perfection, nothing less. Mistakes were not tolerated, excuses were irrelevant, and that pressure created greatness. But it also came at a cost. Relationships were strained, drivers lived under constant expectation, and the line between respect and fear often blurred. Still, the results spoke for themselves. Ferrari continued to expand its influence beyond Formula One. Endurance racing, events like the legendary 24 Hours of Le Mans, became new arenas of dominance. These races weren't just about speed, they were about durability, strategy, mental strength. And Ferrari proved it could master all of it. As the decade progressed, Ferrari wasn't just winning races, it was building mythology. The prancing horse became more than a logo, it became a symbol of excellence, of ambition, of obsession. Owning a Ferrari, driving a Ferrari, even competing against one, meant something. It meant you were part of something bigger, something legendary. But the road wasn't smooth. For every victory, there were losses, crashes, setbacks, moments that tested the limits of the team. And Enzo? He never showed weakness, publicly. He remained composed, focused, unshaken, because leadership, especially at that level, required control, even when everything else felt uncertain. And through it all, one thing remained constant: the pursuit of perfection. Ferrari didn't slow down, it didn't settle, it evolved, faster, sharper, more aggressive, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. By the end of this era, Ferrari had done something extraordinary. It had gone from an unknown startup to the most feared name in racing, a symbol of dominance, a benchmark for excellence, a legend in the making. But success attracts attention, and attention attracts challenges, because in the next chapter, the rivalry intensifies, the stakes rise, and Ferrari faces one of its greatest battles yet, a battle that would define not just races, but history itself.